to welcome next on the stage, and he can come and set up while I'm talking, Alvin Ourrad from BBC News. Alvin is a functional programmer, cloud architect, learner, and speaker at BBC News. He describes himself like this. He's a part-time HTML5 game developer who really thinks the web can win. According to this, he's also starting to dive into graphics programming. Here today with us, Alvin is going to talk about privacy and data ethics in the age of machine intelligence. I'm going to let him tell you more about what he's going to speak, because I think it's really, really valuable, especially nowadays. And we're going to give him a minute to get installed and then listen to him. Thank you.
All right, hello. So, privacy and data ethics in the age of machine intelligence. Right, let's do this. So, I'm actually quite relieved, which is a weird thing to say when you're up on stage, because this is the first time ever that my talk is just slides, nothing else. It's a PDF, because usually every time I had some form of live demo or I needed Node or anything, which meant that if my computer broke, I would be in trouble. But for this one, just have a PDF, so if this guy breaks up, you could just get any computer, and it's really nice. I really recommend it. So thank you for welcoming me to this beautiful place. And so I work for the BBC in London. I work for the news department, which you might have heard of, because BBC have lots of stuff. They have a radio, they have a TV channel, they have many, many things. So it's the news department, and most specifically the innovation unit, which is called BBC News Labs. And I think we're hiring, but anyway, if you're interested in this space of innovation in journalism and tech and all this space, feel free to come and talk to me later. So, what this is about privacy and why I think it's important and why I think we should worry about it. I'm going to touch on the GDPR, which is on everyone's mind these days. And, right, because obviously we've been getting all these emails telling us to accept new privacy policies and everything, but yeah. So then, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about AI and how this whole privacy, data, and AI kind of fits together. So first, bit of a disclosure. I'm not a lawyer. I'm just a programmer like you. So this does not constitute legal advice, and it's observations, and they should be taken as such. And they're also not the views of my employers, right? Right. So with this, we can get started. Oh my God, look at this blurred out emoji. So so privacy and why it's important. So first, the good thing about it is that it's a right. If you've never read the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, I really encourage you to check it out. It's not a big text. It's probably 2 or 3 pages, and it's really plain language. It's nothing like the GDPR, which is a whole 90-page full of legal jargon. So and it's pretty much the fundamental basis of that it's internationally agreed on for human rights. So for privacy, it's saying that no one shall be subjected to arbitrary interference with his privacy, family, home, or correspondence, nor attacks upon his honor or reputation. And also that the law should help us for this, right? Which is good, means we have the law on our side, and it's a right we should protect. Everyone ever seen this? So essentially, I'm not sure how popular this is elsewhere. So the magazine, what it's telling here is that the magazine lost, was prosecuted and lost because for a violation of privacy, and also as a sanction, it had to put on its front page the result of the lawsuit and say, okay, so this magazine lost and had fine because they violated someone's privacy. So why I'm showing you this, just to show you that, well, violations of privacy are real, and they're a thing not necessarily always hidden, and they have consequences. Nope, that's the one. Right, but my problem, every time I do talks about this, I always get the good old arguments, yeah, but I have nothing to hide, right? Why would I care? But the thing is, if you have nothing to hide, there's always the kind of counter-argument, would you give me access to all your messages? So that's what Facebook, WhatsApp, SMS, whatever, or your bank statements, or your emails, or could I just look for all your search history from your ISP? I'm pretty sure the answer is no. Or I use a VPN, but if you use a VPN means you care already. So, which means you care, which is a good thing. Because there are things we don't want to be shared with like the entire world, or just some random stranger, and it's okay because like it's alright. So there's also a problem with that, is that it creates the like notion, like plants in our mind, the notion that there are two types of people, like the good people and the bad people. And if you want to like learn more about this, I really encourage you to look at this talk by Glenn Greenwald, who was the journalist who uncovered like the PRISM scandal with Edward Snowden. So he has a really good talk about like this thing, but essentially, which I have posted as a link. So yeah, essentially, people don't fit into like either I go to work and I do good stuff and I'm a good person, or I don't. Like there are things that are a bit on the verge, like I don't know, like mental health or anything. But like yeah. So this basically means it's just a false dichotomy essentially. Or that's the other argument I get. It's like, yeah, but I've already given it to company X, so why would I care anymore? Well, the problem is with this mindset, it's like you're giving up your state of privacy. It usually means when we give up that state, when we give up the notion of privacy and etc., we're being watched. There's lots of studies that say that we become more conformist, like our behavior changes. So this is on an extreme case, like if you want to, so in a school, for example, what they did is they asked some kids to like draw a house in a very like informal, freehand way. And then in another scenario, they asked another kid to draw a house, but like with the teacher, and also telling him that the result was going to be graded. And obviously the results are very different. The one who knew he was being watched and has like graded results, they pretty much all the kids pretty much came up with like the same standard house, whereas on the other one, it was very diverse, lots of creativity all around. And like when we're in this mindset of like being watched and like being I'm kind of public, our behaviors tend to change, which is why we should like try to like remain in the same thing. So GDPR, which is like the catchword that I guess everyone want to hear about. So for those of you who don't know what it is, it's the new General Data Protection Regulation, which is coming into effect on May 25. That's 9 days, folks. And it's affecting everyone who's storing data about EU citizens. So if you have EU customers, it doesn't matter if your servers are in the US and Norway or wherever, you have to comply with it because that's the law essentially. And the way it's different compared to like the previous Privacy Act is the fact that the fines are a lot bigger. Because like for big tech shops, usually they didn't care because the fines were like ridiculous. They were like 100K or something. Like for this, they're a lot bigger, which is why we've been receiving all these emails about like, oh yeah, we're taking privacy very seriously and we've updated our privacy policy. And this is essentially a result of this. So what this does for us, citizens, it creates new rights that we have with our data, right? So that's the right to be informed, the right to know what the company is doing with it, which is why and also it's trying to push for more, for like plainer language when the companies are explaining us what they're doing with it, because usually it was just buried in a massive like privacy notice in very complicated legal jargon. So this part of the right to be informed is that. It's just literally knowing what's happening. The right to access the data is pretty explicit. The right to rectification, so change it. My favorite one, the right to erasure, so to just make sure we can delete everything once and for all. The right to restrict processing, that's pretty explicit. Data portability, that's just meaning you can get all the data you have from a service and transfer it to another in a relatively painless manner. The right to object to like collection, which is why some people kind of misinterpreted this, and which is why they sent you all these emails, like a big red button of like, if you want to keep hearing from us, click here. So this was like what they're kind of misinterpreted and like used. So anyway, so yeah, then you can also have like rights to what's happening with like profiling. And it also enforces companies to like think about privacy by design as opposed to like bolting it on, which is a good thing for us developers, because usually we never like patching things on top of a big system. We like doing things from scratch. And this is essentially what the law mentions for the first time. It's like when you have to do privacy by design from the ground up, not like bolted onto some existing flaky system. has 4 lawful bases. I'm not going to dwell on these like very, very much. But this is essentially like if you want to have data about EU citizens, they have to be based on one of these like 6 bases. So yeah, consent, contract, obviously legal obligation, vital interest, public task, and if you have legitimate interest, which could be just because I need them to like, so they can have an account or they can use their credit card. So we can't talk about data without talking about AI, really, because it's like basically the way we like transform and the way we make use of the data. I'm sure you've heard a lot of good talks about this already on the topic. But right, so what's happening is like AI doesn't look like this yet. Very soon, hopefully. I mean, the sphere is pretty cool. But so what we think about when we think about when the public thinks about AI in general, they think about all these intelligent robots, which are good and they're going to come. But the problem is AI does not look like this just yet, but it looks more like this, especially on the net. So this is Gmail's smart reply. So what's happening here is essentially someone sent you an email with like something, and then Gmail proposed replies. So what's happening is, as you guessed, the content of the email was like read and parsed and analyzed, etc. And then a reply was created. But what does that mean for the other person? Did they know that when sending you a message, their message was going to be put through a neural net or whatever tech it is they use? Again, these are just questions we should ask ourselves, right, when we're doing AI, like when data and AI are crossing over. Because what we're doing is we're making the machine more intelligent, right? Every time we're feeding these machine learning systems, and again, how much do we know about them, and like how much we want to contribute to them is also something that's not really talked about that much. So another example of something that made me think and reflect, like so, one day on iPhone, you could just like look for keywords, and it would find them in your picture. So if I say, I don't know. Okay, this is the internet, cats. So if you wanted to search, so if you search for cats in your pictures on the iPhone, it would just find all your pictures with cats, which could be a good thing because we've all been like scrolling through for 10 minutes when we want to show like a picture to someone. But it's like, which would be, oh yeah, finally. But also what's happening on the other side is like, from a user, you could go, who gave you permission to run a deep convolutional net or whatever it is used like on all my pictures? Because they're essentially private, right? So another example of like when AI is sneaking into data privacy and we're going a bit, okay. So yeah, this also raises another question. Something that's quite popular with like machine learning people is like, oh, can we write something like Hemingway? Because they have like lots of novels and like people have trained lots of like nets to like write like Hemingway. But my problem with this is like, okay, we can write like Hemingway, whatever. But how about when the machine starts learning to write more like you after like analyzing all your messages? Because when you write at work, it's pretty like, usually pretty standard, pretty polite, but the way you write to your friend or to a lover is usually pretty personal to you. So what if that was being fed and then the AI could learn how to write like you? How would that, like, it pose a problem? Would it be a privacy problem? I'll let you decide, but like. And we don't also fully understand how like the decision-making process of neural nets is not fully understood. Like there's a big article which I invite you to check out, which deals with this in particular. But like, so because of this, because we don't have this full understanding, probably it means we need control, because otherwise it creates biases. I'm not sure if any of you have heard of this article by ProPublica. So essentially, so this was in the US. So there was an algorithm that would suggest how much a person was likely to commit a crime again, based on history and various metrics. And this was used a bit as a guidance for for judges. So essentially, so it would go, they would feed like this person's profile into this algorithm, and they will go, this person is likely to commit a crime again or not, or is 40% or whatever. But the problem is because this algorithm was trained on existing data, it had a lot more data about people of color than it used for the other people, which meant that the algorithm ended up being biased towards people of color, which is a bit scary if you think about it, especially since this was used. Again, if you're into this space, I really encourage you to like read this article because it's just mind-blowing. And this, I think, in my opinion, reinforces why we need control over like what these systems are doing. But like, which is also another problem is even if we have control, we don't know over what, like in what to like look at. So should we make, so what should we make accountable? Should it be the person who writes the algorithm, the person who profits from it, or just the algorithm itself? Like we don't have a basis like in terms of like law or even ourselves when we create it. We don't know where this is heading yet, or like how to like control it. So which is why I think it's important to talk about it. But there's all good stuff coming out of machine learning too. I don't want to go all bleak and be like, yeah, don't use this. This is all, we're all heading to our doom. Because like you've heard of like the cucumber farm in Japan, where they use like machine learning to like, I think, classify cucumbers, and yeah, essentially ended up like their profits were a lot better. It's used for fraud prevention very effectively by some banks. So there is good stuff coming out of it. Just don't want to go all bleak and just like, but I think obviously it needs control. So yeah, I'm a bit early actually, which is good because we're behind schedule. But like, so I wanted to kind of finish with like the quote from 1994, because you cannot do a privacy talk without talking about 1994, because everyone's like, oh, come on, dystopian future, whatever. So it said that we did live from habit that became instinct, in the assumption that every sound you made was overheard, and except in darkness, every movement was scrutinized. So you're like, yeah, dystopian future, I know, like I've heard all of it. But what I want to do with this quote is kind of flip it on its head and like find a link to what's happening now. Like, so because we used to essentially click yes to pretty much everything when we were like, yeah, accept privacy policy, blah, blah. We just used to click yes because this is pretty much all we could do. Because we're like, if you want to use this service, accept our privacy by creating an account. Most of the time we just said yes because, yeah, whatever. But now with the GDPR, we have more arms to help us. Like if we want to question this, if we want to report it, if we want to delete the data. So I want to make sure that these old habits that became instinct, we can now be a bit more careful with what we're doing with our data and just think about it more and know that we have a legal text that backs us up in that regard. Thank you. Questions? Yes, no?
Anyone? Questions? I have one, actually.
Cool.
And maybe I'll start and some questions will come to you. What do you personally do in your everyday life to make sure you handle all your data as far as you can possibly in a well manner so that you're satisfied? What measures do you personally take?
So there are two sides to it. So the first one is I make sure that the messages that I send are being completely encrypted. I originally had slides about this, but I didn't want it to appear more like promo, or I wasn't sure it would fit anyway. So I use two services mainly. So I use Wire for messages, and which is like essentially WhatsApp, basically. But the encryption is a bit better, and it's not owned by Facebook. So I've tried to use, essentially, or make my friends use end-to-end encryption as much as possible. I have like people who are very reluctant to Wire, so they tend to accept WhatsApp. So I try to put everything, like, I try to encrypt everything as much as I can. I try to use a VPN whenever I can as well. And for emails, I use ProtonMail, which is a Swiss-based email provider. So everything is encrypted. They're like backed by Swiss laws. They have all the history of like when every time data was requested, they like put them through Swiss court to make sure that it's a valid request and not just like anything. And they have a full transparency report on their website. So yeah, ProtonMail, Wire are the one you can just start using today, which are they don't require anything. You can just subscribe. And every time I just try to avoid, like every time like something asks you to create an account or something when you're like checking out on some random website, basically I try to avoid this, which is not a massively clever step, but I just try to control it as much as I can. That's it.
Do you have a Facebook account?
I do, but it's very inactive. It's pretty much all from my youth over there.
Okay. Anybody else? Any kind of questions? I invite you to take advantage of having him here now.
Hi. So I have a blog, and I'm using Google Analytics.
Yeah.
And I'm no corp. I don't get any revenue. I don't use AdSense. But I know that the IP is an element of privacy. So what should I do? I can still have some insight into my analytics and still be compliant, though nobody cares about that.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, because it's like small enough. I think well, again, I'm not a lawyer. Like there are probably people more qualified, but like my first instinct was as long as you're transparent, was like if you have a privacy policy that's like in plain language, it's like we collect IP because X, and this is harmless. We're not selling it. We're not, or I don't know. Like it depends what you're. But as long as you're transparent and like you're like obvious, like what you're using like IPs for is on the normal purpose based on what you're doing, I think you're fine. But again, I'm not a lawyer over there. But yeah, but I think that's my understanding of it.